Hello, my name is Andrew Wood, and today I will be discussing the regulation, guidelines, and ethical concerns raised by stem cell research. The current federal regulations pertaining to stem cell research were laid out under President George W. Bush in 2001. It split the duties of regulation between three governmental bodies: the National Institutes of Health, the Office for Human Research and Protection, and the Food and Drug Administration. The issue that arises from this sort of organization and oversight is that these organizations and the people that work for them are authorized to address only specific kinds of ethical questions that come up during both preclinical and clinical stem cell research. In this sense, preclinical meaning before use in humans and clinical meaning involving humans on a direct or indirect level. The individuals enforcing and determining these ethical positions may be unqualified to answer such difficult questions, as they often have no background in either science or ethics. Each of the three agencies oversees a different aspect of this subject. The National Institutes of Health was appointed to strictly focus on the science of such research. This means that they decide which lines of human embryonic stem cells are eligible to be used by researchers who also receive federal funding. Among these regulations are guidelines that help protect the health and privacy of the human subjects involved. They include that stem cells must be harvested with the consent of the donor, the embryos must have been created for use in reproduction, and that the stem cells have not been formed having only research purposes in mind. The first problem that arises from these guidelines is that they do not address or apply to stem cells that have been developed in a laboratory without the help of federal funding. They also do not provide ethical guidance to wade through the litany of ethical questions raised by this practice. Rules of thumb serve to deal with the issues specifically related to the harvesting of human embryos and the informed consent of their derivative human subjects. These regulations also neglect to address the questions surrounding other kinds of stem cells that are not embryonic, such as fetal and adult stem cells, and do not allow for wiggle room as more is learned about this field of research. Essentially, the regulations and standards set forward by the Bush administration under the authority of the NIH simply do not apply to a significant amount of the research being done with stem cells. The Department of Health and Human Services mainly deals with the rules regarding human subjects and volunteers. Their rules actually go beyond the subjects themselves and also apply to any sperm, eggs, or other bodily cells, even though they are not technically human. The Department of Health and Human Services takes care to be sure all volunteers have informed consent to their role in the research. Their goal is to protect humans from harm or pain during the research. This means it is their job to make sure that the subjects are fully aware of the research and what the research means for their donated biological material, ensuring that all who donate understand that their cells will be manipulated and destroyed in the process of this research. The maintenance of confidentiality is also of concern to the DHHS. The last organization, the Food and Drug Administration, is focused on the issues surrounding safety and efficiency that arise from stem cell research. This mainly deals with preclinical, that is, non-human research. It is up to the FDA to regulate the use of cells on a clinical level. These cells are laid out by the FDA as, quote, articles containing or consisting of human cells or tissues that are intended for implantation, transplantation, infusion, or transfer into a human recipient. However, they have little to do in deciding the ethics of stem cell research. Therefore, the FDA does not have the authority to provide an ethical review of the research in question or take part in the debate at all. The implications of the work of these three organizations are vague yet far-reaching. As mentioned before, the ethics surrounding embryonic stem cell research are usually decided and enforced by local institutional review. Since regulation is at the same time federal and localized, different institutions will inevitably develop their own ethical standards that will differ from other institutions. At this point, it is important to remember that the practice of stem cell research cannot be divorced from the practice of assisted or artificial reproduction. While few in the modern world of 2013 will find issue with the use of in vitro fertilization to aid in the pregnancy of those struggling to conceive through natural means, there are still many who are put off by stem cell research. Some argue that as knowledge in this field increases and public interest intensifies, it will only become more important to address this branch of science from an ethical and reasonable perspective. And yet the rules governing IVF are very different and sometimes in conflict with the rules governing stem cell research. One suggestion is that the federal bodies in charge of stem cell research seek out, adapt, and employ the guidelines followed by in vitro fertilization clinics, which are under the authority of two completely separate governmental bodies, the National Academy of Sciences and the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. These clinics follow a standard of informed consent when it comes to the question of how unused embryos are used for the purposes of stem cell research. Since in vitro fertilization is still rather expensive, most people who use it to have children often retrieve and develop multiple eggs and embryos. Often there are spares left over after pregnancy is achieved. Since these embryos are the property of the person who produced them, they must either be stored, destroyed, or donated at the end of the IVF process. The promise that embryonic stem cell research holds for medicine and the future of humanity is far too important to ignore or regulate with blanket rules that are meant to regulate but still ignore important aspects of the research. Potential of this magnitude often takes a long time to come within man's reach. As we stand on the precipice of this monumental era of human potential, we cannot turn a blind eye. We must be willing to sit down and think about how best to approach this question while maintaining both our sense of morality and our sense of free scientific inquiry and progress. It is time for a debate. A discussion that relies solely on metaphysical presupposition will reach a dead end before the debate has time to take off. We must be allowed to entertain the idea, as uncomfortable as some may find it, if we are to arrive at a truly ethical conclusion on how to handle this era of scientific pioneering.